This morning at exactly 6:17 a.m., a 71-year-old man passed away in his sleep. He wasn't sick. He wasn't in pain. And just yesterday, he laughed over tea with his grandchildren. But his body was quietly failing, and no one saw it coming, not even him. We often think death comes loudly, with warnings, with signs, but sometimes it whispers. In the way we rise out of bed too fast, in the strain we ignore in the bathroom, in the skipped breakfast before exercise. And if you're over 60 or love someone who is, these whispers matter. That's why I invite you to stay with me for just a few minutes. Because what you'll hear today might not only save your health, it might give you more mornings to wake up beside the ones you love. And if you find even one insight that speaks to you, please consider subscribing. That's how we keep this space of wisdom and care alive. Today, I want to share 5 silent habits, hidden in your morning routine, that could quietly shape your future. Let's begin. First, strenuous activity on an empty stomach. Have you ever wondered why some people pass away not in their sleep, but in the very first hour after they wake up? Not in the middle of a storm, not during a crisis, but in the quiet, sacred stillness of morning. It happens more often than we think. A moment of peace, a sip of water, a walk to the garden, then suddenly, collapse. It's not always because of age, not always because of disease. Sometimes it's something far more subtle, a hidden danger in our very routine, something we've done for years, something we thought was healthy. But the truth is, your heart is most vulnerable not when you're stressed, but right after you wake up. And what you do in the first 30 minutes could be the difference between life and death. Let me tell you a story. His name was Thomas Whitaker. He was 71 years old, a retired mechanic from Ohio, a man whose hands still carried the memory of engines, of decades spent mending things, tractors, trucks, small-town cars, and lives in a way. He wasn't wealthy, at least not in the way people often define the word, but he had his little garden, a radio he loved, a wife he adored, and a routine he took pride in. Rise with the sun, pour himself a glass of water, and head out into the crisp morning air to tend the roses his wife planted in the spring of '85. But this morning was different. His wife found him collapsed next to the watering can, one hand still gripping the wooden handle, the other resting softly in the grass. The paramedics came quickly. They said it might have been a heart attack, or maybe a stroke. No one could say for certain until the autopsy, but what they did say, quietly, gently, as his family stood in disbelief, was that the stress on his heart had likely been too much, too fast. And here lies the question that lingers like morning fog in the minds of those left behind. How could a man who appeared so healthy, so vibrant, so full of life, be gone in the blink of an eye? The answer, as it often is, lives not in a single moment, but in the quiet, overlooked choices we make each day, especially in those first tender moments after waking. What most people don't realize is that when we open our eyes after a night of sleep, our bodies are not immediately ready for battle. Quite the opposite. They are still navigating a fragile bridge between rest and activity, delicately recalibrating blood flow, hormone levels, and blood sugar after hours of dormancy. In this liminal space, our hearts are more vulnerable than we think. You see, during sleep, our glucose levels drop naturally. The body, having fasted all night, is low on immediate fuel. At the same time, the brain signals the adrenal glands to release a wave of adrenaline, a natural and necessary mechanism to help us feel alert. But this surge of adrenaline comes at a cost. It increases blood pressure and places sudden demands on the heart. Now imagine layering strenuous activity onto this biochemical storm. Gardening, lifting, fast walking, chores. For a younger person, this might be manageable, but for someone in their 60s, 70s, or older, especially with underlying conditions like hypertension or mild heart disease, this is a dangerous cocktail. What happened to Thomas wasn't just bad luck. It was a collision between biology and habit, between good intentions and an invisible threat. We live in a culture that celebrates productivity, that urges us to seize the day the moment our feet hit the floor. But rarely do we pause to ask, is my body ready? Has my heart caught up to my mind's momentum? The truth is, exercise in the morning can be a gift, but only when approached with care. What Thomas, like so many others, didn't know is that beginning the day on an empty stomach, before the body has replenished its energy stores and stabilized its systems, can be a silent trigger for disaster. When glucose is low, the brain, our most energy-hungry organ, suffers. This can lead to dizziness, weakness, even fainting. And when adrenaline is high, the blood vessels constrict. The heart works harder, blood pressure spikes. If there's plaque in the arteries, the sudden exertion could rupture it, leading to a clot, a stroke, or worse. But there's another way, a slower, wiser way. It begins with something deceptively simple: breakfast. Not a feast, not a full-course meal, just enough to signal to your body, I am ready to begin. A piece of toast with almond butter, a banana, a small bowl of oatmeal. What you eat matters less than the act of eating itself, because this is about nutritional priming, a gentle invitation for your metabolism to awaken, for your blood sugar to stabilize, for your heart to breathe a little easier. Then, and only then, comes movement. Not the kind that demands sweat, but the kind that speaks in stretches, in slow walks, in the turning of joints and loosening of muscles. This is what science calls metabolic transition, the body's natural ramp from rest into rhythm. It's the reason Tai Chi and morning yoga have survived for centuries, not because they burn the most calories, but because they honor the wisdom of moving with intention. And woven into all of this is a third and crucial element: cardiovascular protection. The idea that we must treat the heart not just as a machine to be revved up each day, but as a delicate engine that needs time, fuel, and gentle ignition. When we exercise after eating and gradually increase intensity, we reduce the likelihood of blood pressure spikes and heart strain. We lower our risk of arrhythmias, of falls, of tragedy. Thomas's story does not have to be yours. If there's a lesson in his passing, it's this: strength is not found in how fast we move through the world, but in how wisely we choose to begin each day. Taking time for nourishment, giving our bodies the grace to wake gently, and understanding that health is not earned through effort alone, but through presence, patience, and care. Because maybe, just maybe, the key to a longer life is hidden in the quietest part of the morning, when we choose not to rush, but to listen, not to push, but to prepare, not to conquer the day, but to walk into it gently. 2. Rapidly getting out of bed. We often think of aging as the accumulation of years, gray hairs, slower steps, deeper lines etched around the eyes. But few realize that what truly shifts with age is the delicate rhythm between body and gravity, between motion and blood flow, between intention and biology. And perhaps nowhere is this invisible dance more evident or more easily disrupted than in the first few seconds of your day. The simple act of getting out of bed. It seems harmless, even mundane. You wake, you rise, you begin. But for an aging body, one that has spent 7, 8, sometimes 9 hours in horizontal stillness, that moment of transition is anything but simple. It is, in fact, a silent negotiation with physics and physiology, and if rushed, it can become dangerous. I remember the story of Mr. Allen, a retired music teacher in his early 70s, who once joked that his mornings were more dramatic than the orchestra concerts he used to conduct. One day, in a moment of carelessness and urgency, he swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up too quickly. Within seconds, the room spun violently around him, and he collapsed before he could reach the light switch. Fortunately, he only bruised a rib. But what lingered far longer than the bruise was the sobering awareness that his body was asking for something he hadn't yet learned to give: patience. You see, during the night, the body doesn't merely rest, it reconfigures. Blood pressure naturally lowers, heart rate slows, and the autonomic nervous system enters a state of repair. Circulation prioritizes the vital organs in the core, drawing blood away from the extremities. It is a brilliant orchestration of internal calm. But when morning comes, and we suddenly demand upright posture and forward motion, we are asking the heart to accelerate, the vessels to constrict, and the brain to stabilize all at once, often without warning. This is why so many older adults experience what medicine calls orthostatic hypotension, a sharp, sudden drop in blood pressure when rising from a lying or seated position, and its effects, though brief, can be deeply disorienting. Dizziness, blurred vision, a sense of detachment, and in more serious cases, fainting. At its core, this is not a flaw of aging, but a mismatch between how gently the body transitions and how abruptly we push it. The physiology is simple, yet profound. As you shift upward, gravity exerts its pull, drawing blood toward the lower limbs. If the heart and vessels are not given adequate time to compensate, to constrict, to pump more vigorously, to redirect blood to the brain, the result is a temporary starvation of oxygen to the most essential organ we have. And the brain, so exquisitely sensitive to changes in oxygen and pressure, does what it must. It signals alarm. You feel lightheaded, you sway, you reach for something to hold on to, and too often, there's nothing there. But the consequences of that moment, that silent negotiation gone wrong, can be far greater than just a stumble. Falls are the leading cause of injury-related hospitalizations in adults over 65. And a fall in the bathroom, on tile or hardwood, can turn an ordinary morning into the beginning of a long and painful decline. A broken hip is not just a fracture, it's a fork in the road. Recovery is hard, independence may be lost, and often so is confidence. Yet the beauty of this risk, if we can call it that, is that it is almost entirely preventable. The remedy lies not in technology or pills, but in awareness and rhythm. Begin by waking slowly, without urgency. Before even sitting up, take a moment to breathe, deeply with intention. Allow the mind to arrive before the body follows. Then shift gently to a seated position, letting your feet dangle off the edge of the bed. Give the heart a moment to register the change. Wiggle your toes, roll your ankles. This is not just stretching, it is stimulation, inviting circulation back to the limbs. When you do finally rise, do so with purpose, not speed. Walk slowly at first, not because you're weak, but because you're wise. These small rituals, practiced daily, become acts of protection. But more than that, they become gestures of respect, not only for the aging body, but for life itself. Because the truth is, how we begin our day shapes how we carry ourselves through it. A calm, steady start invites presence. It anchors us in safety. It grants us dignity. Mr. Allen eventually recovered, and now he tells everyone he knows. Getting up is like tuning an instrument. If you rush it, you play out of key. But if you give it time, you find harmony again. And perhaps in the quiet hush of morning, that's all we're really looking for. Not perfection, not speed, but the kind of harmony that lets us rise with grace, balance, and care. Not because we fear falling, but because we've learned the wisdom of staying grounded. 3. Straining in the bathroom. There's a kind of silence that settles over a house in the early morning. Not the silence of peace, but of discomfort. It was in those quiet moments that my Uncle Robert, a man once full of life and subtle wit, began each day not with a sunrise walk or a steaming cup of tea, but with a grim ritual, sitting on the toilet, gripping the edges of the porcelain seat, face pale with strain, trying, sometimes for 15, even 20 minutes, to do what most of us take for granted. What began as a private struggle soon turned into a lingering discomfort that colored his entire day. And like many older adults, he never mentioned it, as though this pain was something to be accepted, a price of aging rather than a signal, a symptom, a warning. But what if that warning mattered more than we thought? You see, straining in the bathroom is rarely just about digestion. It's a quiet stress signal from the body, a whisper from the cardiovascular system, a plea from the digestive tract that something isn't right. And if we listen closely, we'll realize this isn't just about constipation or effort. It's about pressure. Physical pressure, yes, on the rectal veins, leading to swelling, to hemorrhoids, to bleeding and discomfort that steals dignity in small, relentless ways. But there's also internal pressure, the kind that builds within the chest when we hold our breath and bear down, momentarily stopping the flow of blood back to the heart, then releasing it in a sudden surge that can rattle even the healthiest vessels. For those already living with fragile arteries or elevated blood pressure, this can quietly escalate into a cardiovascular episode, the kind no one expects until it's too late. And it all starts with a habit so mundane we rarely think about it. But let me take you deeper. At the heart of this lies digestive harmony, the balance our gut must maintain to process food, absorb nutrients, and move waste with grace and rhythm. And that rhythm is easily broken. A diet lacking in fiber, built on refined sugars and stripped-down starches, slowly dries the intestinal landscape. Without enough water, the quiet carrier that softens the path, stool hardens, becomes stubborn. Without movement, the everyday walking, the climbing of stairs, the bending of knees, the intestines grow sluggish, their contractions weaker, their journey longer. Add to that the hours we sit, not just at the table or in front of the television, but on the toilet itself. Every extra minute spent there, scrolling, reading, escaping into our phones, compounds the problem. The pelvic floor tires, the blood pools, the strain intensifies, and all the while the body remembers. It remembers each painful push, each held breath, each moment of friction between intention and resistance. Yet there is hope, always hope, because this is one of the most preventable struggles we face as we age. What Robert didn't know, what I wish I'd told him earlier, is that small, consistent changes hold the power to return ease to this daily rhythm. Adding fiber-rich foods, the crunch of apples, the softness of oats, the richness of lentils, is like oiling the gears of an old machine. Drinking more water, a glass before breakfast, one with each meal, is like softening the ground before a seed takes root. Moving the body, even gentle walks or a few yoga stretches, awakens the digestive muscles, reminding them how to move, how to carry, how to let go. Even posture matters. A small footstool beneath the feet, raising the knees above the hips, mimics the natural squatting position of our ancestors, and in doing so, opens the rectum more fully, reducing the need for pressure, for strain, for pain. But perhaps more than anything, what I've come to believe, through Robert's story, through conversations with caregivers and doctors and aging friends, is that dignity in aging isn't just about independence or memory or walking without a cane. It's about comfort, quiet, everyday comfort in the most personal of moments. And if we can restore that, if we can make this part of life smoother, softer, more humane, then we are not only preventing injury or disease, we are restoring the small joys of daily life. So if you or someone you love has been quietly struggling in the bathroom, let this be your moment to listen, to change course, to nourish the gut, hydrate the cells, and honor the body's signals. It is not weakness to seek ease. It is wisdom, and in the quiet comfort of that wisdom, life opens once more, not with pain, but with grace. 4. Health is a legacy and the ripple effect. My grandfather's hands were weathered, not by time alone, but by service. The kind of service that didn't ask for recognition, only responsibility. He was never rich, never famous, but when he passed at 89, there were 4 generations standing at his bedside, not just to say goodbye, but to say thank you, not for what he gave, but for how he lived. Because his real inheritance wasn't money. It was something far more enduring. We often think of legacy as something external, a will, a house, an account. But the truth is, the most profound legacy we leave behind doesn't sit in a vault or behind a password. It breathes in the health of those who remain. It echoes in how we taught them to care for their bodies, their choices, their daily rituals. And in that sense, health is not a personal possession. It is a living, breathing gift passed from one generation to the next. But what happens when that gift is neglected? I've seen it too many times. A slow deterioration that begins with overlooked symptoms, skipped checkups, poor sleep, isolation, and ends with a family quietly rearranging their lives to become caregivers. It starts subtly. A son who takes more calls during work hours, a daughter who cancels her vacation, a grandchild who doesn't understand why grandma doesn't come to soccer games anymore. The weight of declining health doesn't fall on one person, it ripples. It creeps into the calendar, the budget, the emotional energy of everyone in the circle. Health, when lost, becomes an inheritance too, but of a different kind. An inheritance of worry, of physical strain, of silent grief at the diminishing of someone we love. And perhaps most painfully, the diminishing of who they used to be. But it doesn't have to be this way. There is a different story, one written with intention, one that begins not with illness, but with prevention. One where a 72-year-old man walks his granddaughter to school, not because he must, but because he can. One where birthdays aren't marked by medications, but by miles walked, meals shared, and moments remembered. That story is written not in hospitals, but in habits. Because when we prioritize our health, when we nourish it daily, move with care, rest with purpose, connect deeply with others, we do more than extend our own lives. We remove the invisible burdens from our loved ones. We give our families not just more time with us, but better time. Lighter, more joyful, more present. We give them peace of mind, and that too is a kind of wealth. When we stay well, we stay involved. We help raise the next generation, not just with money or advice, but with presence. We model what it means to live intentionally. A grandfather who still dances at weddings, a grandmother who still cooks with her grandchildren, laughing and teaching, not from a chair, but shoulder to shoulder. And the lessons our health teaches don't stop with us. A child who sees their elder choose fruit over processed food, or go for a walk instead of lying in front of the TV. That child internalizes something powerful. That care of the body is a form of love. That prevention is power. That aging is not a slow fading, but a conscious act of stewardship. These silent teachings, repeated over years, create generational change. Habits passed down not through words, but through observation, through example. That's what my grandfather gave us. He never sat us down for health lectures. He simply laced up his shoes every morning, even in his 80s. He drank water. He stretched. He laughed a lot. And when the time came to say goodbye, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't filled with regret. It was peaceful, because he had lived well, and in doing so, taught us how to do the same. That is the legacy I want to leave behind. And if you're still breathing, if your heart is still beating, then you are still writing yours. With every choice you make, every meal, every step, every night you go to bed on time, you're not just caring for yourself. You are sending a message across generations. You are telling your children, your grandchildren, that they are worth staying healthy for, that your presence matters, that love at its core is not just a feeling, but a commitment to being there, fully, joyfully, vibrantly. Health is not a privilege. It is a responsibility, a quiet, daily devotion to the people who love you most. And the legacy it leaves, not measured in years, but in memories. 5. Honest living and financial literacy. They say that true wealth can be measured in numbers: the size of one's house, the weight of one's investments, the yield of one's portfolio. But those who have walked the long road of life, who have known hunger, who have counted coins by the light of a kitchen bulb, who have held trembling hands through uncertain times, they understand a deeper truth, that real wealth is never just about possession, but about principle. It is not about how much you've stored in vaults, but how deeply you've invested in the kind of person you've become. And perhaps no lesson reveals that truth more clearly than the quiet, steadfast power of honest living. I remember my uncle, Thomas, a quiet man with weathered hands and a spine that never bent, even when life gave him every reason to bow. He worked as a mechanic for nearly 40 years, fixing engines with a calm precision, always whistling a tune no one could quite name. He never earned much, at least not by the standards of the world. But what he did earn, every cent, every dollar, was his, hard-earned. clean, honest. And because of that, he never had to hide, never had to scheme, never had to pretend. That, to me, was a wealth no market could measure. What Thomas taught me, without ever saying it aloud, was that integrity compounds over time. Just like interest in a well-tended savings account, every honest action, every ethical decision, every refusal to cut corners or cheat the system, those were deposits into a different kind of inheritance, the kind that doesn't rust, doesn't get taxed, and doesn't disappear when markets crash. But in today's world, where shortcuts are sold as wisdom and applause is often louder than conscience, the idea of earning your way, slowly, quietly, ethically, feels almost radical. We have raised generations who know how to tap an app, but not how to balance a budget, who understand credit scores, but not the character that gives credit its meaning. And the tragedy is not just that they might struggle financially, it's that they may never know the deep, sustaining pride of building something with their own two hands. That is why financial literacy, when rooted in moral clarity, becomes more than just math. It becomes a form of love. To teach someone how to earn with dignity, how to save with purpose, how to give without guilt and spend without shame, that is to hand them a compass, not just a calculator. It is to show them that money, like water, can nourish, but it can also erode depending on the channel we carve for it. And that channel, that sacred framework of values, is something we must build brick by brick, day by day. We build it when we say no to a shortcut, when we pay our debts even when it hurts, when we delay gratification not because we're afraid to spend, but because we understand the quiet power of waiting. We build it when we tell our children not just how much we made, but how we made it. Because without that story, without that moral scaffolding, wealth becomes brittle. It may shine for a while, but it crumbles under pressure. Inheritance without ethics becomes entitlement, and entitlement is a dangerous currency. It bankrupts both gratitude and resilience, but the promise is still there, and it is profound. Because when you live honestly, and when you pair that honesty with real financial understanding, you create something rare, a legacy that empowers rather than enables. You raise children who are not just rich in inheritance, but rich in wisdom, who can stand on their own 2 feet, build their own futures, and recognize that success is not a birthright. It is a responsibility. This is why, as we grow older, we must ask ourselves not just what we are leaving behind, but how. Are we leaving behind property or purpose? Are we handing over assets or understanding? Are we teaching them to consume or to contribute? To live honestly, and to teach others to do the same, is to believe that the world is still shaped most by quiet hands, by thoughtful choices, by the kind of people who don't just pass on wealth, but who pass on worth. So if you've spent your life working with integrity, struggling at times, saving when it wasn't easy, giving when no one saw, then please know, you've already built something extraordinary. You've planted the seeds of a legacy no market can shake. And if you choose now to teach those lessons, not as sermons, but as stories lived and shared, then your legacy will not end with your last will and testament. It will echo in how they live, in how they earn, and in how they treat others. And perhaps one day, someone will remember you, not for the money you gave them, but for the principles you live by. And in that memory, your true wealth will live on. Your future isn't written in stone. It's being written right now, with every step you take, every jar you open, every laugh you share, every choice you make. Aging isn't an ending. It's an invitation to live deeper, to love stronger, to walk a little taller. So which habit whispered to you today? What's one thing you'll do differently tomorrow morning?